FM, WPFW. I'm your host, DeShuna Spencer. I am so happy to have my good friend here in the studio today. You kind of heard it a little bit. Adrienne Fikes. She is the soul power coach. She has a new book out called Finding Your Unspeakable Joy, right there where you are. Welcome, Adrienne.
Thank you, DeShuna. It's good to see you again.
I know. Good to see you, too. If people have any questions or comments during my first segment, you can call 202-588-0893 or hit me up on Twitter using the hashtag EmpowerHour. So I'm so glad that you're here. A lot of times on my show, I talk a lot about a lot of tough subjects, whether it's racism or issues with economics, just all types of issues that are happening around the world. The 45, as people like to call them. And next week is Thanksgiving, so I really wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about joy and finding, so people can find their joy despite of everything that's happening in the world today. As someone who's a leadership coach, I'm pretty sure a lot of people you talk to are probably having a hard time finding joy these days.
Yeah, well, the people that I talk to often come to me because there's like you just said, there's a lot going on. Mm-hmm. And even in my own life, there's a lot going on. Right. And so part of the reason why I wrote this book is to encourage people to think about the joy that's happening, even though there's a lot going on. Mm-hmm. And how do you tap into that? How do you access that when you need it? How do you use that joy to fuel you through all the other things that are going on that are not so joyful?
Right. And talk about, your book is about unspeakable joy. How do you define that?
That's a great question. So, the reason why I call it unspeakable joy is because, oftentimes, you run into somebody and you're like, how are you doing? They're like, yeah, I'm doing great, or I'm doing well. Right. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but no, how are you really doing? Mm-hmm. When I ask you, where's your unspeakable joy? That's a higher level. That is, an audacious, outrageous level of joy that most people don't even strive for on a daily basis. And the question is, well, why not? Like, we have all these other reasons to be joyful and grateful and happy. Why not tap into them? So that joy is like, those times in your life where you are, you can just feel it welling up from your chest and you're almost crying with just tears of joy. Why not aim to live at that level where you are experiencing that level of bliss and joy and peace every single day of your life?
Right. It's, it sounds really great in theory. I think they'll be like, okay, yeah, all right, easy for you to say, but you...
No, it's not. It's a target, and they, you talk about, what are you reaching for? Mm-hmm. And I also talk about, like, if your unspeakable joy on a regular day is like at a 3, that's kind of awesome. 30% of your day is filled with this level of joy. That's beautiful. But what would happen if you moved it up to a 5 or a 7 or an 8 or a 9, and that was your normal level of joy? It's a buffer. It's a protection. It's, I call it self-care, but it's also self-defense. So all of these other things that are coming at you, I'm not going to say they're not going to hit you. Oh, they're going to hit you, but they're not going to impact you the way that they would. If you're a 3 and you drop down 5 points, you got a problem. Right. If you're existing in your normal level is at an 8, dropping down 5 points might feel like the end of the world, but you're still at a 3. You're not devastated. And it's so important with everything else going on for people to really think about, where is my stress level? Where is that despair in the back of my head creeping forward? Where is the depression? Where is the anxiety? Right. And instead of focusing on all of that, the bigger you make your joy, the more strength and tools and resources and energy you have to deal with whatever else is coming at you. Right,
because things definitely come at you. I remember we had a conversation one time after the shooting at the church in South Carolina. And I think at that point, most people were just like done. I mean, of course, things kept happening afterwards, but things kept happening, like, oh my God, you just keep getting punched in the face with what's happening in the news. And I think people have a hard time, like, how do you find that, how do you find that joy? Like, what do you do? You have a gratitude, like, thing, journal. I mean, some people do that. I mean, I try to do that like every night. I think I tried like last month. And before I go to bed, I'm gonna write one great thing I'm really grateful for. And it's it's all the same thing. I'm happy to be alive. Happy with my husband. Happy food.
There's starving children on the other side of the world. Yeah,
I feel like stretching. I'm really grateful for stuff. But
yes.
I don't know why it's so hard for me to think of two things every single night that was different. Besides, I have food on the table and a husband who helps pay the bills while I have my company.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's a great example. The interesting thing about it is the worse you feel, the more difficult it is to tap into that gratitude.
Right.
And so it comes off as sarcasm. It can actually be counterproductive if you are fearful or you're feeling despair or, depression. Those types of affirmations, that gratitude can actually be counterproductive.
Oh, really?
Because it grains on you. You're like, well, I should be right. Not I am grateful. I should be grateful. Or what's wrong with me? Why aren't I, grateful for my house and my family and my, and then it just becomes a thing where you feel guilty and you feel shame and you are getting negative, and something that was supposed to lift you up is actually pulling you even further back down, because now not only are you ungrateful, you're broken because you should be grateful. Right. So I wrote this book, I've got a lot of tools that I've picked up over the years, things that I use in my own life to keep me, operating on this level of joy. And I really started compiling the things that worked for me. This time last year, and not only was it, that election, that day, but election day, my aunt died suddenly, and I was in the middle, of writing a book about joy, and suddenly, my life is just spinning. And so these were the tools that I used to get out of my head, stop thinking about what I should be feeling, stop thinking about what I should be doing, and in that moment be able to stop and reset, because nothing else you do is going to be enjoyable or productive or useful or easy until you tap back into that joy. So what I really wanted to do is stop talking about it and get people in a place where, they can pick up this book and they can actually, in that moment, do something, and you don't have to think about it. It's right there in the book. You pull up an exercise and you do it. And at the end of the exercise, you're like, okay, maybe I went from a 3 to a 4. Okay, I'm getting a little better. And it's that, because it's the consistency and the momentum. Everybody at this point has heard, do a gratitude list. Right. But how consistent are we about really doing that? We're not.
I keep forgetting. It's like, oh yes, right. Tomorrow, month goes by. and
it's like, ministers laugh about going to church when everything is wrong and not going to church when things are okay. It's that consistency, that practice, that discipline of accessing this divine level of joy, accessing what is really coming from within. And that's the other thing. This motivation is coming from within you, as opposed to something that's external. There's a lot of advice, there's a lot of motivation, there's a lot of things that are outside that should help you and are catered to like a general self-help. And a lot of them are useful. But if they're useful for 100 people and they're not useful for you, then now again, why didn't this help me? What's wrong with me? And so this is getting people, there's a part in my book where I talk about not what should motivate you, but what really does motivate you, and how do you begin to tap into that motivation as a practice, as a habit, I have to do a gratitude list every day, but here's a whole host of things that I can do. And where am I keeping this information so that I can access it when I really need it?
Right. I think it's very interesting that you talk about that in your book, because it seems like it's like evergreen. People can always pick it up and can always do like so many activities. Some of the other self-help books, I think they have these activities where you do it one time and then you finish the book, you think, my life is going to change. It's kind of, it's not, you finish reading SOAR, and then like all of a sudden, you know, you're soaring. Like, that's not reality. And your book, I think, is definitely probably more practical than things people can use all the time consistently.
Yes, well, and that's exactly why I wrote it, because I use it. Like, I'm still reading my book. I read my book on the way in here. Like, it's just because it really is a reminder. It's a refresher. It is, you know, it's like saying I just ate lunch, so now I'm not hungry, so I don't have to eat again.
Right.
Like, you're gonna get hungry again. And so the question is not did you eat? The question is, what are you doing to consistently feed yourself? And in the same way that, you know, we may not always meal prep like we should, but we really think about what are the things we need to do to make sure that we are eating. And this is a way of training your brain. It's a behavioral practice where you are using, you know, there's a lot of, you know, discipline in this book. There's a lot of research in this book, but instead of talking to you about the theory behind what I'm asking you to do, I'm getting you to experience it.
Right.
Because for myself and a lot of my clients, we end up thinking about it instead of actually doing it. So we spend time talking about being purposeful. We end up talking about peace, but we're not actually feeling it. Right. So I wrote this so that you can get in a place where you are feeling joy, where you are feeling peace, where you're feeling happiness, where you are feeling safety and security and support that's coming from within, so that then you have the energy to go do what it is that you need to do for the day.
What do you think about now? Because I think one of the issues that everyone's so like ingrained in news right now, every time, you know, 45 says something crazy, or there's another, you know, domestic terrorist attack, or another brother, sister's gunned down, whatever the case may be, it's always something. I think a lot of it has to do with kind of being tuned into the news maybe too much. Do you think we should kind of take a step back sometimes and kind of go to ourselves? Because I think that it causes so much anxiety. At least for me, it does.
Absolutely. Like, you have to be very careful what you're taking in. Marketing and media are all based in some very powerful psychology in that, and it's the same type of psychology I use in my book. You're planting these seeds. You know, if you watch CNN, or I don't watch CNN. If you watch any kind of news media, it can even be your local news, and you turn the TV down, you start to see things that you weren't seeing because of all of this stimulation going on. If you turn away from the TV and you listen, you'll start to hear things that you weren't necessarily hearing. And all of this, you may not consciously understand that you're taking it in, but this fear, uncertainty, and doubt is being fed to us. You know, you can't go to a gas station some places and not be consumed by commercials. Right. And they're just, all day long, they're just planting these seeds. And in marketing, I need you to want something for you to give me your money in exchange for what I'm offering you. So I have to keep planting these seeds that you need this, you need this, you need this. So I have to keep telling you about a problem, so that we spend so much time focusing on our problems. We focus on everything that's going wrong, instead of what is beautiful and lovely and joyful and fabulous, because they're happening right next to each other. Right. But what we focus on is really what plants those seeds, and it becomes our thoughts, and it becomes our beliefs, and it becomes our feelings, and then it starts influencing our actions, which it's a cycle. It's a perpetuating cycle.
In your book, you talked about Fred Shuttlesworth's biography, and it was really interesting. It's called A Fire You Can't Put Out, just in case anyone wants to look it up. But it talks about the terrorist attack, the domestic terrorist attack that happened on Christmas 1956, and how basically he kind of persevered on. I mean, they survived, but it kind of puts things into perspective, you know, about, you know, especially during a time where people were fighting to survive, and people were being murdered at higher rates for civil rights. And we have now some of the issues we may want to quit over, like my website goes down. Right. Maybe I should just quit. Like, no one bombed my house.
That's real. Like, we get stuck in traffic, and you're like, wow, you know. That's real. You know, and it's part of it. I have been working in the space of human growth and development for like 20 some years now. and, human growth and development, organizational development, leadership, executive leadership development, and I've had my coaching practice for going on 10 years. And one of the things that, was always an underlying issue with me was every example of triumph and achievement that you hear, oftentimes it's somebody who, they might have had a health problem or they had a challenge that they rose to, but the inspiration that I get to keep moving is really looking at these civil rights leaders. What inspired Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth to get up out of that house and say, no, he was actually inspired to do more. Instead of walking, they didn't just threaten your family; they tried to kill you.
Yeah, kill you and your family on Christmas.
They tried to kill you, and I studied him a lot. He's one of my heroes, and there's a interview that they talk where he's talking about that experience, and he says, in that moment, it didn't make sense that there's literally, like in the moment of the explosion, he felt this sense of peace that didn't make any sense. And he knew he was going to be okay. And it was fascinating to me, like, what is the discipline in your life that gets you, it's like muscle memory and it just kicks in when you need it. What is it that you need to be doing on a daily basis to build up that spiritual muscle, that peace muscle, that muscle of unspeakable joy, so that when things come at you, you automatically respond in a way that is powerful. He stepped into his power in a moment where nobody would have blamed him from packing up his family and getting, like, in fact, when he came out of the house, it was 16 sticks of dynamite. He comes out of his house, it collapsed. Everybody knew he was dead. And the police officer that went in there to recover his body finds him alive with, barely a scratch on him. And he's like, if I were you, I didn't think, and he's like, I know these people, I didn't think they would do this. If I were you, I would get out of town. And he looks at me and he says, you go, because he knew, like in, Birmingham, Alabama, whoever threw the dynamite probably went around the corner, put a cop hat on, came back, to investigate the scene. And he said, you go tell your clan brothers, if I survived this, then I'm here for the duration. And it's like, the perspective that it takes to go through something like that and come out with power and determination and focus and courage and say, this is you tried to destroy me and you've actually inspired me to continue moving. Like, how do you get there?
I know, it was so powerful reading that. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start complaining, because I was so upset last night. I was trying to do a Facebook Live with one of my filmmakers, and we tried for an hour and it just wouldn't work out. I'm like, why do everything keeps working? But no one bought my house,
right? And I'll talk about somebody that I know you love, Ida B. Wells.
Oh yes, that's my
I mean, she is the most appreciated hero.
I want to do a biography. I want to do a movie on her. That's my dream.
I started reading her book.
Yes,
her words. Her explanation.
I have it at home.
Because I'm like, what would inspire a woman a black woman to travel alone through the deep South, where she knew they were coming after her, to document the murders, the lynchings, and the data. Like, I was, people talk about, W.E.B. Du Bois, and they talk about Booker T. Washington and their debate about how to respond. But does anybody realize what they were debating was how to respond to the data that she gathered? Like, she was the foundation of this entire conversation. And how do you, what kind of courage does it take? Don't tell me you overcame, you were successful in your business and now you're a millionaire. That's fabulous. talk to me about the courage it takes to go down into a space where you know they want you killed.
And your own friends have been killed and been lynched, Exactly.
That's, so from that, when I talk about soul power coaching, that's where I'm coming from.
Right.
I'm like, because it's a struggle for us even when it's not a struggle. It's real in these streets. It's real.
It is real
And it's like, but and and the sad part about it is I have been blessed and fortunate to grow up, as many of us did, around some tremendous civil rights workers, tremendous freedom fighters, people who were not famous, people who were famous.
Right.
And sometimes you watch them crumbling. I look at the impact of the fight. I look at what it did to my own father. He was a brilliant engineer. We see pictures of him and he's always the black guy,
Wow.
In those pictures, and we've heard stories about what he went through. I know you had to be brilliant just to be invited into those spaces. Right. But what does it do to you? Like, everybody knows, do you think about going into spaces where you're unwelcomed?
Right.
What does it do to you day after day after day after day to get up
can break you.
and go? It can, and in many ways, you're seeing people dealing with it in unhealthy ways. And so my biggest intention is to bring those kinds of people some hope.
Right.
So that as you're sitting on the edge of the bed trying to gain, the strength to make your legs move, to go into whatever that space is again, and keep fighting that fight on behalf of all of the people that you are fighting for, because it's not just about you, which is why you're doing it. But you've got to take care of yourself while you're doing that. You've got to keep yourself in a space where you are being supported and loved. You are supporting, and I'm not talking about other people, you are supporting and loving yourself the way that you are trying to support and love other people.
Right, that's a really good point. I think a lot of people around here are definitely freedom fighters in their own way, always giving back, marching, speaking truth to power, and it can be very draining. You have a lot of, we have the same friends, so we know how draining it can be, but you still have to continue to fight. But you also have to find joy. It made me think about Common. So there was an article, because he's dating, I think, Angela Rye, and so he was talking about how, she's very woke, but he was like, she also likes to have fun. He's like, it's okay to be woke, it's okay to speak up for the people, but you gotta laugh sometimes. You can't. It always can't be, serious. It always can't be the Rufus zone. The
moment you give up your humanity, the moment you give up your humanness, you've lost. I've been in this space, when I was working in organizational development. As soon as I got, people would find out that I was studying psychology, like, are you studying me too? Oh, you analyzing me? Oh, right. I was like, no, I was finished analyzing you 5 minutes ago. No, but the reality is, they want to put you on a pedestal. Right. They want to act like, I've had people in my inner circle look at me like, you're a life coach. What are you getting mad for? You help people with behavior change. How are you? You're not allowed to be mad. You're not allowed to struggle. I'm not allowed to be upset. I'm not allowed to cry. And I'm like, no, honey, no. I get to feel because emotions are just that. It's data. So if I'm not tapped into how I feel, then I'm not paying attention to the important information that's coming from within me that is showing me in that moment how to respond. I might respond in 5 different times the same way, but today in this moment right here, I'm feeling a different way, and my intuition is leading me to do something different. Well, if I'm discounting my feelings, then I can't trust what the information that's coming from within me. And I can't respond in a way that might be difficult. It might be controversial. It might anger somebody. It might be inconvenient, but is it authentic? Right. And having the courage to have those boundaries around yourself. So as you do the work that you're doing for people, you can draw the boundary that says, yes, I am there for you. I'm not there for you right now. Right, I'm here for me right now. Right.
And this next week, this time, we're going to be there for a lot of people. We
Right.
have family and friends, at least some of us. But so I guess my question would be, how to have joy. I mean, people do enjoy being around their families, but then sometimes families can be stressful for the holidays. It can be very stressful. Or for some people, sometimes people feel guilty because you also get that message that scroll on Facebook. Well, some of us don't have family anymore, and you feel guilty for posting about your family. So how can people find joy for those who are depressed because maybe they've lost family members, or for those who have family members and maybe their family may not bring as much joy as they would like for his family, and they feel like they have to sort of figure it out for the holiday?
So the first thing I would say is, own your situation. Stop comparing yourself to other people. But the beautiful part about it is, whatever space you're in, whether you have no more you could be the last of the Mohican, you are the only one standing, but you still have people who've known you. You still have friends. You still have, a community around you. If your family, you may have to go to that aunt's house for Thanksgiving, or you may have to, your mama might be the one that, people have very complex relationships with family. And so I would just encourage you, first of all, you set the intention to go in, and even though this is, a difficult relationship or a difficult circumstance or someplace, I want to set the intention that this is going to be a good memory. One of the things that I encourage people to do is use that time with family, just in the same way you can direct your thoughts. Use that time to direct the energy into a positive space. So it's Thursday. Everybody loves Throwback Thursday.
Right.
You're scrolling through your phone and your computer, getting these old pictures of you with your crazy hairstyles and
crazy outfits.
Yeah, crazy outfits. I talked about when my aunt died. The other side of it was, we had to gather as a family for this funeral. So not only was it, the thing of gathering under these sad circumstances, a few weeks before Thanksgiving, but it was also immediately after the election. And there was a tweet that had gone out that was disproven later, but there were some Trump supporters on a bridge in North Carolina waving flags, and they were like, oh my gosh, the Klan came out. Well, I had to drive underneath that bridge to get to my aunt's funeral. And so the real talk, I'm doing research, like, are we going to have some, because I'm going to the funeral, but, are we going to have some problems getting into North Carolina to celebrate my aunt's life? And the beautiful part about that is, as I started researching this, I fell down into an internet hole. The reporter that was talking about debunking this whole thing started talking about some North Carolina history that was attached to the area where my family is from. And I started, so one thing led to another, and I ended up uncovering some history about my family. So, and then by the time we got to, the service was beautiful. I'm seeing some family members I hadn't seen in a long time, as we do at funerals, and we all want to get together. I actually drove back down a few weeks later after Thanksgiving, and I would think it was like three or four cars of cousins. We drove down into the country, to find the graveyard, the church graveyard where my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandfather, and my great uncle, and a whole host of other people are buried. And it was an adventure. It was wonderful family time, but when you're gathering with family, it's an opportunity to rehash all of the problems. There's some people in my family that are like, they got about 5 minutes to be together before they start fighting. But what if you push that energy into a positive place? What if you grab the pictures you have, whether they are digital or they are, in an old dusty photo album in your storage, pull those out and bring them with you. The cool thing about it is, when I went to Atlanta after Christmas, and we sat at my sister's kitchen table and went, because she ended up with the family pictures, and we went through boxes and boxes and boxes of pictures. And the kids were, they're playing their video games, and they're in and out of the kitchen eating food and all of that. So they weren't interested, but they were totally interested. And so as we're telling these stories and we're reminiscing and we're, oh my goodness, look at this hairdo and look at, I was able to pull out pictures of my aunts and uncles and get them to cousins who had never seen these pictures of their parents before. And that energy, that space of reminiscing and celebrating and honoring your past brings a whole different interaction to gathering with family. Now it's, tell me that story again about my uncle. Tell me that story again about, what you remember about my mom. So even if you don't have family, I went up to, I'm from Colombia. I went up to Colombia and I ran into a woman who looked at me and said, I remember your father. And she started telling me a story about my father. And I was like, I promise you, I don't remember you. I don't know you, but she knew who I was. And she's telling me this story about my father. And I'm like, it does something to you to tell these stories because, I come from the space of personal growth and development. And the reality is we approach personal growth and development from a corporate thing. You've got your executive leadership. I've even known some entrepreneurs that are sponsored by businesses and they give them a coach or, I've got my executive coach at my business, or you're getting, performance improvement coaching or whatever that is. People that focus on our personal development is really focused on you as an individual in this particular role.
Right.
And I want to expand that definition into who you are as a person. And you can't really understand who you are on a really serious level until you begin understanding your people and who you come from. And you can talk about, you can call your ancestors and you can talk about, I'm from Africa, but it's a whole other thing. I talk about, people, we were discussing Ta-Nehisi Coates' work. And he said something, the general at the White House said something stupid about, I don't even remember what he said. And Ta-Nehisi Coates brought up the 3/5 rule. Right. And what struck me, as much as I studied that in school and I knew that history, it's a different thing to be able to call the ancestors who were 3/5 of a human being. And it does something to me that is very powerful and uplifting.
So this was really a really great conversation. We're totally out of time.
Okay.
Actually past time, but
this is
great. No, girl, it's fine. But how can people find your book so they can read it?
So it's called Finding Your Unspeakable Joy right there where you are. And you can get it on Amazon. And you can also go to soulpowercoach.com or findunspeakablejoy.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Soul Power Coach. Up next, Digress is Giver, which is Voices for a Second Chance. But first is Our Sun Today, which is Where It All Begins by Lila Hathaway. And this is Empower Hour on 89.3 FM, WPFW.